I'm Ryan from ExtremeTerrain.com, and in this video I'm going to give you my top picks for cold air intakes fitting your 2007 to 2018 JK. There are going to be a couple of different cold air intakes depending on your year range, so make sure you select the right one for your year Jeep. You're also going to want to make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. That way you can check out more information on these three cold air intakes as well as all of the other cold air intakes that we have available and some other great Jeep content. So there are going to be a few reasons you'll want to install a cold air intake onto your Jeep. Anytime you can help the engine breathe a little bit easier in or out, you will hypothetically see a little bit more power. Now, in this engine, it's been optimized from the factory for a long time. They've been using these engines for a very long time, so the intake isn't really a restrictive point. So by adding a more open cold air intake, you're not going to see huge gains in power, although you are going to see some. Most of those gains are going to be at the top of the RPM range, which is an area that we don't spend a ton of time in our Jeeps, but you will see a little bit more power when you're merging onto the highway, making a pass, something like that. So if you are looking for a little bit more power, cold air intake is going to be a way to do that. Some other benefits from a cold air intake is going to be a little bit better throttle response, maybe an extra MPG or two when you're looking at efficiency, and you're going to get a little bit of that noise from underneath the hood when you really stomp on the throttle. So there are a few different benefits to cold air intakes. Now, I will say that there's also a bit of a drawback if you're somebody who does a lot of off-roading where there's a lot of water crossings or even just a lot of mud. The factory airbox does a nice job of helping to keep some water out of the engine. It has an intake that's up nice and high, and it also needs to almost fill the box completely for that water to then make its way into the engine. With a cold air intake, you're eliminating that box with most of the cold air intakes we're going to talk about today, so you don't have that extra safety and security, and usually those cold air intakes will have an intake a little bit lower than that factory setup. So depending on how you use your Jeep, a cold air intake may or may not be a good idea. That is for you to decide. But I am going to give you my top 3 picks, and again, these are just my picks for a couple of different options depending on how much money you want to spend and what you're looking to get. So the first cold air intake we're going to talk about is the Redrock 4x4 cold air intake. This one's going to be very affordable, very simple. Then we're going to talk about the Kanan Series 77 high flow performance cold air intake. That's going to be made out of metal instead of plastic. And finally, we're going to talk about the InGen Evolution cold air intake. That's going to be a completely closed box, so it's designed to get even colder air into the engine, and it has a few additional bells and whistles also that are going to drive up the cost. So if you have a higher budget and you like those additional features, that one is going to be a nice option for you. But for now, let's get into it. The first cold air intake I want to talk about is the Redrock 4x4 cold air intake. This is going to be the least expensive option that we're going to talk about today, but it's still a very good cold air intake. This is designed to replace the factory cold air intake tube with this aluminum one, and this version does come with the black wrinkle powder coat finish on it, so it's not going to stand out quite as much in the engine bay as some of the other ones, which, depending on your view of things, is either a good thing or a bad thing. If you're looking for more of an OEM look, this is going to give it to you. It almost looks like the plastic factory air intake tube, but again, this is going to be aluminum. This does have a couple of spots to hook up what you need to hook up here, so your vent tube and also your ambient air temp sensor. They're going to be able to plug right into that, no problem. This part over here is a bit of the shield. There's also another piece, and this shield is going to go on the bottom side and also on the engine side, standing vertically between the fender and the engine. And the idea of the shield, again, is to draw the coldest air possible from that front corner of the engine bay, instead of just drawing the ambient air that's under the hood, which is going to be a little bit warmer. Again, this is a cold air intake designed to get the coolest, most dense air to the engine as possible. And then over here, you're going to have your air filter that comes with the system. That is going to be a reusable filter. So it's going to do a pretty nice job of filtering, and also something that you're not going to have to replace because you can just go ahead and clean it out and reuse it. Again, this is going to be a very simple system. It's going to work for you, and it's also going to be the least expensive of the ones we're going to talk about today. This Kanan Series 77 high flow performance cold air intake is going to be just a little bit different from the Redrock one that we talked about. It is still going to replace the factory plastic intake tube with an aluminum one. This one, of course, is polished instead of black, so it's going to give you a little bit more flash under the hood than the one from Redrock that we just talked about. This is still going to have a shield, although the shield is a little bit different. So instead of shielding from the bottom and a vertical piece between the fender and the engine, this is going to shield from the top and also another vertical piece between the fender and the engine. Again, the idea is the same, drawing the coldest air possible from that front corner of the engine bay where air can whip in through the grille and underneath the fender. But again, instead of covering from the bottom, this covers from the top, just a little bit of a different design and a little bit of a different style. This is also going to come with a conical reusable filter. Kanan was really one of the first big companies to be building those really high flow cold air intakes that are also oilable and reusable. So this is going to include one of those as well. This system, being that it is K&N, and there are some differences between this and the Redrock 4x4 one, this is going to be more expensive than the Redrock 4x4. Again, this is going to be polished aluminum. It has the iconic K&N filter. It has a little bit of a different style shield. If this is the style you like, you have a little bit of a higher budget, this is going to be a great option, but overall, still going to have pretty much the same features and do pretty much the same thing as that Redrock 4x4 option. The InGen Evolution cold air intake is the last cold air intake we're going to talk about today. This is the most expensive and also the one with the most features. So over here, this is something that you get with all your cold air intakes. This is the intake tube. This one is plastic instead of being metal like the two other options that we talked about. Not necessarily worse or better, just going to be a little bit different. Over here, you have your air filter. Again, going to be rinsable, reusable, pretty much the same as the other ones that we talked about. So the big difference that you're going to find is right here in the middle. And this is going to be an air box, a sealed air intake box. The other ones just had a shield to help keep some of the hot air out and gather more cold air. This is going to do a better job of that because it is sealed. It's a sealed box, so you have your intake coming from one very specific area. You're not going to get as much bleed of hot air from underneath the hood into your intake. So this is going to be a little bit better of a cold air intake, just pulling that cold air. Now, you are going to pay a little bit more because there's more material here, more engineering that went into this, being a full box instead of just a shield. Another feature that you're going to get with this cold air intake is the gauge that you see on the front here. And what that gauge essentially does is measure vacuum. It just does it in kind of a rudimentary way. The idea is that the vacuum gets pulled from the inside of your air filter here. So if the engine is trying to pull more air than it's able to get through the filter, that means that your filter is clogged and you're gonna have a vacuum there. So that gauge will read that vacuum, essentially just telling you that your filter is getting dirty and that it's getting clogged. Now, that is a nice feature to have. It makes it very easy to tell, but the other reason that that is there on this system and not the other ones is because, again, this is a sealed box. You can't easily see your air filter and see if it's getting dirty like you can with the other ones quite as easily. So again, this system, more expensive, sealed box, doing a better job of pulling just the cold air and has the additional feature of having the gauge, but you have to be willing to spend the extra money. So those are my top picks for cold air intakes fitting your 2007 to 2018 JK. We talked about that Redrock 4x4 cold air intake, also the Kanan Series 77 high flow performance cold air intake, and finally that InGen Evolution cold air intake. Make sure you comment below, let us know what you think. Again, these are just my top picks. There are a lot of options out there. Let us know if you have any questions, which cold air intake you're running on your Jeep, or which one is on your wish list. And also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can check out more information on these cold air intakes, as well as all the other options that we have and some other great Jeep content.